Some photographs are taken to be remembered forever. Others are taken with the assumption that no one outside a locked room will ever see them. And then there are the photos you are about to hear about. Images captured during wars, covert missions, secret experiments, and classified investigations that were never meant for public eyes. These photos were buried in archives, stamped classified, and in some cases locked away for decades. But eventually, something went wrong. Someone leaked them, someone released them, or time itself forced them into the open. These are the top 10 photos that were supposed to stay classified. The people who took these photos never imagined the world would see them. In late 2003, inside Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, US military personnel began documenting what they believed were routine intelligence operations. The photos were not taken by journalists or enemy forces, they were taken by soldiers themselves using personal digital cameras. Many of the images showed detainees hooded, restrained, or stacked on top of one another. Others showed prisoners threatened by dogs, forced into stress positions, or mocked by guards posing and smiling for the camera. At the time, these photos were considered internal documentation at most. Some were shared casually between soldiers, others were kept as evidence by military investigators who were already receiving complaints about prisoner treatment. The images were never meant to leave military channels. That changed in 2004 when the photos were leaked to the press and broadcast worldwide. The reaction was immediate and explosive. They also became some of the most recognizable war photographs of the 21st century. The US government classified many of the photos immediately after the scandal broke, arguing that their release could endanger troops and also inflame violence. Some images remain classified to this day. Others were only released after years of legal battles and Freedom of Information Act lawsuits. The first photos taken inside the Pentagon after September 11th were never meant for the public. When American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon in 2001, military photographers and emergency responders documented the damage immediately. These images showed the exact impact site, internal structural damage, and debris inside one of the most secure buildings in the world. For years, only a handful of officials ever saw them. The Pentagon classified the majority of these photographs, citing national security concerns. Officials argued that releasing them could reveal vulnerabilities in the building's structure and security layout. Only a small number of exterior photos were released publicly. That changed slowly over time through Freedom of Information Act requests and court rulings. Some of the images were eventually released. They showed wreckage inside the building, collapsed walls, and the path the aircraft took through reinforced sections of the Pentagon. The US government did not want the world to see what atomic bombs actually did. After the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, the US military photographers documented the aftermath in extreme detail. These photos showed flattened cities, human shadows burned into walls, radiation victims and survivors suffering from severe burns and illness. Almost all of these images were immediately classified. For years, the US government tightly controlled what the public could see. Only carefully selected images were released, often showing distant destruction without focusing on human suffering. Officials feared that widespread exposure to the human cost of nuclear weapons would spark outrage and anti-nuclear movements before the US could establish strategic dominance during the early Cold War. It took decades for many of these photos to surface. Some were released in the 1950s, others not until the 1970s and beyond. When they finally became public, they shocked the world. These images permanently changed how nuclear warfare was perceived. They were never meant to leave classified archives, but once they did, they made it impossible to deny the true consequence of atomic weapons. The cameras captured everything the public was not supposed to see. When the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded 73 seconds after liftoff in 1986, NASA had dozens of cameras tracking the launch. High-speed photography captured the moment the external fuel tank ruptured, the shuttle disintegrated, and debris scattered across the sky. Immediately after the disaster, NASA classified many of the images and videos. Some photos showed details that contradicted early explanations of the accident. Others captured the breakup sequence in disturbing clarity. There were also classified images showing debris fields and recovered shuttle components that indicated a far more complex failure than initially admitted. NASA feared public misinterpretation and loss of trust. They also wanted to protect ongoing investigations. Over time, time, many of these images were released through official reports and media requests. They played a key role in uncovering the truth about the O-ring failure in cold temperatures. What the public eventually saw was not just an accident, it was proof of ignored warnings and preventable failure. The photos were never meant for public release, but once they were seen, they forced major reforms in space flight safety. The Soviet Union was obsessed with secrecy. During the Cold War, the USSR conducted hundreds of nuclear tests. Soviet photographers documented everything from mushroom clouds to blast effects on buildings, vehicles, and animals. These images were classified at the highest levels. The photos were meant strictly for military and scientific analysis. Public release was unthinkable. Many of these images only became public after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, when archives opened. Researchers and journalists discovered thousands of photographs showing massive explosions, shockwave damage, and radiation experiments. Some photos revealed tests that were never officially acknowledged. Others showed environmental devastation far worse than publicly admitted. These images shattered decades of Soviet propaganda that portrayed nuclear testing as clean and controlled. They were never intended to reach the public, but once they did, they rewrote the history of Cold War nuclear development. The photos were hidden because they proved something officials denied. During the Vietnam War, U.S. military and Allied forces were accused of operating brutal prison facilities known as tiger cages. For years, officials dismissed the claims as enemy propaganda. Then the photos surfaced. In 1970, U.S. congressional aides visiting South Vietnam secretly photographed the tiger cages at Con Son prison. The images showed prisoners crammed into tiny cells, some shackled, some injured, and others malnourished. The photos were immediately classified and nearly buried, but they were eventually leaked to the press and published in Life magazine. The images caused outrage worldwide and forced the US government to acknowledge the existence of the cages. These photos were never meant for public eyes. They exposed war crimes and contradicted official statements. Once released, they fueled anti-war protests and permanently damaged US credibility during the conflict. These photos exposed one of America's most secret surveillance systems. In 1984, classified images taken by the KH-11 spy satellite were leaked by intelligence analyst Samuel Morrison. The photos showed a Soviet aircraft carrier under construction. They were published by Jane's Defense Weekly. The US government was furious. Morrison was prosecuted and imprisoned. The photos themselves proved how powerful US satellite surveillance had become. These images were never meant to be seen by anyone outside intelligence circles, and their release confirmed the existence and capabilities of one of America's most classified spy satellites. The images showed something the government wanted hidden. In the late 1940s and 50s, the US conducted nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll. Military photographers documented the effects on ships, wildlife, and the environment. Many photos showed animals exposed to radiation, ships contaminated beyond use, and island landscapes rendered uninhabitable. The US government classified these images, fearing public backlash and international condemnation. For decades, residents displaced from Bikini Atoll were told it was safe to return. The classified photos told a different story. When the images were eventually released, they confirmed long-term radioactive contamination far worse than officially acknowledged. The photos were never meant to leave military archives, but once they did, they validated decades of claims by displaced islanders. The mission was supposed to be deniable. In 1960, US pilot Francis Gary Powers was flying a classified U-2 spy plane over the Soviet Union when it was shot down. The US initially claimed the aircraft was a weather research plane, but that story collapsed quickly. The Soviets released photos of the wreckage, the intact pilot, and recovered surveillance equipment. But what many people do not know is that US intelligence had its own classified photos of the crash site taken by recon satellites. Those images confirmed the plane's purpose and the failure of the cover story. The photos were classified for decades and only released later through declassification programs. They revealed how advanced US surveillance capabilities already were at the time, and these images were never meant to be public. The photos were real even if the explanation kept changing. In 1947, debris was recovered near Roswell, New Mexico, and military officials initially described it as a flying disc. Photos were taken showing officers posing with the debris during a press briefing. The story was quickly changed to a weather balloon explanation. The debris photos were archived, and decades later, the US Air Force released reports stating the debris was from Project Mogul, a classified balloon program. The photos themselves were always real. What was hidden was the classified nature of the program behind them. These images became some of the most analyzed photographs in modern history, not because of what they showed, but because of how secrecy shaped the story. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlovsky, and I will see you again soon. Bye!